When you have to shoot, don't talk.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Trap House podcast. Thanks to all the sponsors. We have WeebyKnives.com. There's a whole list, if you get on their website, of different knives available there to you for either skinning in the field or you need a fleshing knife in your fur shed. There's several options there, so check out WeebyKnives.com. We also have J3 Outdoors. They're J3O.com. That's Jeff Haggerty there. He maker of the Hags bracket. He's even got a coffee line out now, Trapline Coffee, I believe. I haven't had it yet. I'm not much of a coffee drinker myself, but you might want to check it out. So yeah, J3O.com. Then Top Lot Stretcher Company. They're great sponsors. Good people, had them on the show, and they have an adjustable stretcher that we're really fond of, that we like. So you can check out their website. It's toplotstretcherco.com. And last but not least, it's Hoosier Trapper Supply. Season's almost here, so head on over. Our catalog's recently been mailed out. We got everything you need, from trapping supplies, trapping packages, lure bait, urine, and including deer scent. So we're right in that neighborhood that time of year. So it's very exciting. It's a good time. So get stocked up at HoosierTrapperSupply.com. All right, welcome back to another Trap House podcast. Just me and Charlie here, going to answer a bunch of questions. It's getting closer to season, so more questions are coming in. So it's hard to address them on the actual show at Hoosier Trapper Outdoors show. So it's good when we can sit down and kind of just go through them,
Right.
So keep sending them in. We'll keep doing this, and hopefully people get something out of it. Don't be afraid to ask questions, because that's how we're all going to learn.
Right. And I will say the questions are basically the same over the years. So a lot of these are going to be addressed again. We might put another spin on it or something, well, not a spin, but we may elaborate a little bit more than what we did maybe at one time. So get this fly away from me. So anyways, there might be some redundancy here, but anyways, before we get started, there's two things I want to mention. For those of you that are in Indiana, there is the ongoing Gray Fox project. I think this is the third and final year of season for it. So Justin will put a link below, but the Gray Fox hotline, if you do happen to catch a Gray Fox in a trap, they will come out, get the Gray Fox, collar it, that kind of thing. And they'll also pay you pretty well for that Gray Fox. So the number for that is 812-343-8350. And Justin, like I said, he'll put a link below. And then the Kansas State University has the coyote carcass study. And that's actually for trappers in Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. And Justin will put a link for that one below as well. But just they are collecting coyotes to check for a specific parasite. And we actually did a podcast about this 2 weeks ago. So it's pretty interesting conversation for those of you that hadn't already listened to it. So
Yeah.
Just kind of a public service announcement there.
Yeah.
So.
And one more thing to add on that Gray Fox. If you want to keep it, they'll pay you for the carcass as well, even if you weren't going to radio color.
Right.
That's an option.
Right.
But it'd be nice to let it go.
Right. Yeah. There's not very many of them. So if you find even one hit on the road,
Yeah.
I mean, they're just interested in Gray Foxes from Indiana. There's two or three particular counties that they want the foxes from. But I think if you had one from a different county, you could definitely call them and report it. I think that'd be a good idea. So,
Yeah. You ready to dive in?
Yep.
This one's a big one, and you hear it all the time.
We actually talked about it on the last podcast.
Yeah. Getting permission in places to trap. Pretty common question, especially for new people.
Right.
Yeah. You can go old-fashioned way and start door knocking.
Right. It is, if you do that, it is ideal to stick with farmers. And there's kind of a, there's this level of courtesy there. So if they're very busy in harvest season, particularly if they're crunched in by the weather or whatever, they probably don't want to be bothered out in the field by you talking to them about trapping. So it's you got to be careful how you approach that. So years ago, they got fed up and they wouldn't let anybody trap, because that was during the fur boom years. I've mentioned this before. So it is easier generally to get permission to trap unless there's someone already there. I will say that when you get turned down several times, it's hard to keep going, but just keep asking. So, I mean, it gets frustrating and kind of knocks the wind out of your sails. But just keep knocking and asking. Check your Google Maps for who owns what, that kind of thing. Or if you got the Onyx app on your phone, or that's a good way to figure out who owns what ground and what you're looking for. So
Right.
Another option is always state and national forest land. Most states will allow that, some don't. Here in Indiana, National Forest, Hoosier National Forest is available to trap. There's no one to talk to specifically. You just were able to do it. Strongly advise staying away from deer season, the big hunting seasons. The other one is the state properties either have a draw or you talk to the property manager. The draw is already passed, so it was the first Saturday of October. But you can talk to the property manager in a lot of cases and get a place to trap. So the other thing is when you're going out and asking permission, don't, I'm not saying you need to dress up, but you also want to look somewhat decent. Just try to present yourself as good as you can. So once you get a place or two and you are respectful of the property and you do a good job catching critters or whatever, or helping the guy out if he's got raccoons in his barn, then farmers all talk. So it's easier to network off of it once you get a baseline for a couple places. So,
and you never know what it could turn into. If you like to deer hunt, that could also potentially be a spot that you could hunt later if you do a good job too.
Right. I will say it's definitely easier to get trapping permission than deer hunting permission.
Right.
So, but once you get to know these people and these landowners and you're friends with them or become acquainted with them, then a lot of times it is easier to jump into some other things. So,
yeah. Another popular one right now is permission on social media. There's different ways of going about it, but I just saw last night a guy post, hey, trapping season's getting ready to start. I live in this county. If you know some people that have, issues with coyotes or beavers blocking up the dam or building a dam, send me a message. So that's a great way too. I mean, everyone's online these days, obviously. So
right,
that could be spread around too, and you might get a private message you wouldn't even expect. Here's 200 acres.
Yeah, you'll get some good ones, and you'll get some that are probably, I live in town and I got a raccoon in my back door, so you'll get stuff like that as well. But yeah, I mean, there's all of those things are available. So just kind of use your creativity a little bit on getting places to trap. One thing too, you might check with your hunting buddies. A lot of them have hunting leases, depending on the state that you're in. That's pretty common in a lot of places, or permission to hunt certain places, that kind of thing. So you may be able to work through them to get in places after they're done deer hunting. So, which is pretty common nowadays anyways. You can't do a lot of land trapping during the peak, certainly the peak part of the deer season. So,
right. Are there certain scents or baits that would or wouldn't be used depending on it being early or latter part of the season? Like gland lures and early season lures, would you use late?
Right. So my general rule of thumb is when you start the season out and the weather is mild, you want to stick with milder smelling lures. And as the season ramps up and gets colder, you keep going to stronger smelling lures. Sometimes if you got stuff that's too strong, they'll want to roll in it. And one remedy to that is don't put your bait or lure your lure on the top edge of the hole, throw it down in the hole. I'm usually not a super big fan of that, because if you're using bait, that kind of gets, but that's a very common thing that people do to avoid rolling in them. If you do have something that really strong and smelling, you want to use it down in the dirt hole, get it down deeper in the ground. So my perspective, as I've mentioned in the past, is they probably smell the lure first. Your urine kicks in as thinking another one's been there, and then the bait's what's keeping them there to got the set long enough to get caught. So the whole thing on that is just basically build up. Now the long distance lures are almost always have skunk in them. And unless it's really cold, I would recommend using those away from the set. So 10, 15 feet from the set, up on top of a fence post, up on a tree limb, somewhere it can get out into the air and kind of get them into the area. And then they'll check out whatever attractant that you have at your set. Sometimes the trailing scents work quite well to get their attention, particularly when they're walking by your sets and they don't even act like they're there. If you're on a 2-track or a road or whatever, just, squirt a bead of that across the track, and sometimes that will get them to stop and then maybe check where your set's at. So don't run the trailing scent across your trap bed, but just alongside it, and then across the 2-track or Forest Service road or edge of the field or wherever your situation is. Generally, you always try to set traps on path of travel. So
Right.
gland lure is we're in this case we're going to refer to a gland lure as a fox gland lure, a coyote gland lure, or a bobcat gland lure. So gland lures in this respect we're talking about the glands from the animal that you're going after. Generally speaking, coyote gland lure is not as effective in December. I'm not saying you won't catch them, but it's generally not as effective in December because it's after the pup dispersal and they haven't really established home ranges yet. And generally a gland lure is kind of a territorial type thing. So that's it's kind of a general rule of thumb. And I actually heard somebody the other day say the complete opposite. But anyways, you can ask 10 trappers, get
Right.
15 different answers. But I think this originally I heard from a very, very good source. In fact, it was Gary Jepson. So you go along with the December lull, and then then you're using gland lure. Probably a better choice is to stick with a curiosity type attractant. So
Yeah. And say, for instance, if say you bought just a few lures and you're new, just getting out there, and you went guns a-blazing and got really strong lures to begin with, not thinking, like Charlie said, down in the hole or away from the set, or you could approach it with just, as far as volume amount, cut it way back.
yeah, don't get crazy.
You don't have
with
to
it.
dump a whole half a 1 ounce lure in there. You can just get by with a little bit. It goes a long way. Half a cap can be, on a long distance, is quite a bit.
Right.
You
right.
can go more with like even a quarter or less. Sometimes we dip blades of grass in there
Yeah.
and wipe it on the back of hole. So
Strict-
something that strong, they'll smell it. The coyote's got a nose.
Right. And you might reference our Q&A video that was probably up a month ago, 4 weeks ago, I think. Because we covered this in that one as well. So if you want some follow-up to that, you might check that podcast out as well. So
Yeah. This one's a good one. This question here. Is it difficult to make catches early in the season when it's still warm, or later in the season based on natural food availability for predators?
yeah, that's a kind of, that can be fairly extensive.
Yeah. Especially, we're talking about deer season, and when gut piles are happening, there's a lot more there for predators to get to without much effort at all.
Right.
So, yeah.
So to address the early season, so if you're summertime trapping, yeah, it's a challenge because the animals are lazy. It's hot. They're not moving very well. Probably not burning a lot of calories because they don't have to worry about keeping warm. So, and their diet is probably different than what there's probably more vegetation diet than say come later in the fall. So when the season actually opens, so here in Indiana, our fox and coyote season opens October 15th, and that is generally too early for any type of fur quality, but a lot of guys get out and catch them. And I think there's a big advantage to that time of year in terms of just it's prior to the dispersal.
Yeah.
So if you are in family groups, you can make some of those double and triple and quadruple catches if you're on the family group. So that is one advantage of that early season trap. And generally the weather's better then. You're not fighting the weather so bad.
Don't worry about freezing up traps.
Right. And you know, it's not as big a deal nowadays because trapping pressure isn't like it once was, but you're also getting animals that have never had any trapping pressure. So unlike the ones that'll be around in January. So we already talked about the December lull. That's a tougher month to catch stuff. And a lot of people start trapping, you know, after deer season, and that's when that is. And that's basically because coyotes are hanging out trying to figure out what they're doing, what their home range is going to be, what they're, you know, that kind of thing. And then we're also right after Justin mentioned, right after deer season. So there's lots of food available out there from all the, you know, deer that have been dumped or dead deer gut piles, all of that kind of stuff. So, you know, once that wanes down, then you work more off, then maybe they're more likely to come to an attractant. I think when you start getting into January, particularly if you have some really cold weather, it can be pretty easy to get them to come to a set because food is definitely getting sparser for them. You know, the ground's frozen and they require more calories to stay warm. So that is definitely a good time to attract them as well. So,
yeah. I mean, so there's pros and cons of that early season.
Well, yeah. What I might mention too, for those of you that put out big baits, say deer carcasses, you know, hog farmers that got hogs or whatever that you put out, and you want to stake those down so they can't be drug off. Don't set right on them because you can catch a lot of non-targets, you know, anything from crows to whatever. So you want to stay away from that. But those big baits definitely are good ways to catch them, you know, particularly as the season progresses into colder weather. So.
Is it a huge concern to use different gloves for setting traps and putting out baits and scents and lures?
So there's guys that don't even wear gloves and they set their traps. They never wear gloves at all. I wear gloves mainly because it's easier on your hands, that kind of thing. And we just wear leather gloves. We're setting traps. That's what we try to do. When we put our bait and lure on, we do put a different pair of gloves on. And a couple reasons. One, keep that stuff off your hands. Get on the steering wheel and everywhere. As trappers, most of us don't really care, but the rest of our family members might. So, yeah, so, you know, just from a very practical standpoint, gloves are a good idea when you're applying bait and lure. The other thing is, you know, best case scenario is kind of like how I want to approach it. So if you can keep that bait and lure off your setting gloves where it's going to end up on your trap, where the trap may potentially be dug up because you've got attractant on your trap and they're just curious about it. They don't know that it's a trap. But so anyways, yeah, I don't know if it's a huge concern, but I would wear them. Let's put it that way. Just from a practical sense. So, I mean, cold weather, trapping, I mean, just help protect your hands more than anything.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So. If you accidentally snap a trap on the finger, it lightens the blow. If you pinch yourself, you know, it helps out to have a little bit of a layer of protection there. Right. Then, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go if you forgot your gloves back at the truck and it was a haul in or something. I wouldn't make the trip. I'd go ahead and set, do the best you can, keep it as clean as possible, you know, with your hands. But so it's not a make or break deal.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
When is a drag most effective? Could it be used in an open cornfield? I would not, unless it's pre-wrapped heavy on something.
Right, and then an open cornfield, there's not going to be anything there.
Yeah.
And I guess we should also say it depends on the quality of drag that you're using. There are some drags that maybe you could use in a cornfield, but I think it's still risky. Yeah. So you got a 300-acre cornfield and you got a big coyote and he just takes off and he's able to pull those stalks over and not be able to get that drag dug in. Then, I mean, it's kind of exciting, but then it gets old pretty quick when you're trying to find them. So And the other thing is, if you're in an open field, cornfield, just stake them. I mean, it's just way better just to stake them solid, and then you there's no concern at all.
Well, I'm assuming that the question was sent in thinking that where the set would be most effective is in the view of the public.
Oh, okay.
That's how I'm taking it. So they want it out of there, not stake there. Once it gets caught, it can run and get out of view. But that's a gamble, and I don't think that's worth the price you paid for that trap and the time you spent to put it out there to lose it. And have an animal out there that just makes us look bad as trappers all around. So
right. The animal doesn't deserve that. So.
No. So yeah, I wouldn't do it in that situation. Heavy brush or pre-wrap and things like that, where it calls for it. Yeah, but not open cornfield.
In the how-to section on our YouTube page, Who's Your Trapper Outdoors, you can find a how to set up a drag setup on there. So generally you want to stay in that 10 to 12 foot length of chain, because the shorter the chain, the more control the animal has over the drag. So, get that chain out pretty long, and that will help you significantly, and then use a good quality drag. But I still would not recommend it in a cornfield. So,
storing baits, lures, and urines. We've covered this one a lot over the years.
Yeah, I got asked, I think at least twice today by email, and we address it all the time. So,
almost with every order too, they ask, and it's fine.
Yep.
If you don't know, you don't know, and so we'll just keep saying it. Storing bait and lure. Some people want to put it in the refrigerator, which you can do.
You can do that.
That's fine.
It's not necessary.
It's not necessary. Yeah, and the urines, more than anything, probably with the urine, is getting that airspace out of the bottle.
Right.
Lures and bait. Speaking of ours, I don't know about what other people are doing, but there's additives and preservatives and things that go a long way, and they're good year to year, and sometimes even better if they sit out. We just only pretty much recommend don't store them in the sun. Cool,
right.
Dark place in the garage, just fine. Out in the barn or whatever, they're fine, and they'll keep for years.
Even if it reaches 100 degrees in the summertime, as long as it's not sitting in the sun, it's okay. It's not, we like to sell lure and bait, but there's no sense in buying it if you already got some left over. I would use what you have. If for instance, our top dog, it will get more liquidy, which is fine. In fact, I would use that liquid because it'll soak into the soil in your dirt hole, so even better. And we actually have some people that buy it a year in advance and let it set. So anyways, that we get that question a lot. And I think part of this comes from guys buying deer hunting scent, because there's so much stuff written about deer scent. The bottom line is you buy a scent, it attracts deer, and you shoot it. That's the whole idea. So we don't need to get in the weeds on all this information overload out there on scent. Some of it, or a lot of it, just being strictly armchair. And so try not to read too much into that, and that just keep it out of the sun. Temperature's not particularly important, and keep your airspace out of your bottle. So in other words, if you got a 16-ounce bottle of urine and you've used half of it, you essentially have 8 ounces left. If you put that in an 8-ounce bottle and get rid of that airspace, it'll keep pretty well. So urine, if it doesn't smell like ammonia, I would be concerned. If it smells where it just is flat in smell, where it's just basically lost the smell, don't use it, or buy some other stuff to use with it. Don't count on that. It's just not very good stuff. And on occasion it will spoil. Urine will. So if it smells like sewer or just like it's actually spoiled, then don't use it. But if it smells like ammonia, it's just fine. And like I said, if it doesn't smell like that, I would be concerned. I had a call last year. Guy says, this urine smells like ammonia. So, well, better that than if it doesn't. So anyways, all urine has an ammonia smell to it.
Gun of choice. We haven't had this one, I don't think. Like what's a good trap line gun?
Right.
There's several out there, but I still love the youth size chipmunk that I was introduced to through Charlie years ago. And I think the bottom line is I would stick to something cheap.
Yeah.
You're going to bang it up. You're going to get it rusty. You might drop it out in the water. It's going to get clogged with mud. There's all kinds of stuff that can happen out there. Or heck, you might be making a set and accidentally leave it. I've done that.
Yeah. And that was in a rainstorm too. So we had
My bad.
well, if you get too close, sometimes stuff will lunge up and bite the barrel. I mean, crazy stuff like that. So don't use the good stuff. I mean, it's just rough. Those Rough Rider 22s, we have those as well, little pistols.
Yep.
Those things are awesome. And if you want to drop that in the creek, clean it up later, it's like, it's $150 gun at best. So
Yeah.
it's just,
And they go on sale a lot.
Yeah.
They seem to run sales on them
Yeah.
quite often.
they had a deal at the gun shop over here a couple years ago. If you bought 3, you got 1 free, or if you bought 4, you got 1 free. So it's like,
Might as well.
it's well armed on the trap line. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, and just a 22. You can play around with whatever loads you want. Those little 22 shorts, if you shoot a coon with them, sometimes it's just under the skin. So, just kind of play around with what you want to do. So, and we talked about shot placement on a recent video, so you guys can reference that. So,
Yep. New traps without treatment. Do you wax them?
is it worth the trouble to do the treatment? Was kind of the question. So, in other words, if I got new traps, do I really have to wax them? Because I really don't want to. I think was kind of the perspective on that.
I mean, I would feel better doing it, but once again, it's one of those things. Like if you bought brand new traps, it's already mid to late season, and you just want to get out there and get going. Go ahead and set it. You might have some issues along the way with that, but I don't think it would prevent you from not catching.
At least something. So my perspective on that is get the oil off of them and go ahead and wax them. Or if you want to go something quicker, get something like Formula One and just dip them and go. You are spending day in, day out checking traps.
Yeah.
So if I would advise taking a half hour or an hour or whatever it's going to take to get those traps waxed. That way you're giving it the 100% effort on that. And that's kind of how I look at it. So, if you're going to spend time driving or walking or both to check traps every day, just a little bit of prep time is probably a good idea. And at minimum, it speeds the trap up. It keeps your rust under control. It's a great maintenance tool. And when you get new traps, they do have oil on them. They do have machine oil on them. So you want to get that off, wax them, and then go. If you aren't going to wax them, which I don't recommend, but if you aren't going to wax them, at least get the oil off of them.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I don't know how many years I've been trapping now, but I can't think of any time where I haven't prepped a trap before taking out, unless it was a conibear.
Right. And there are guys that just wax everything to, take care of the traps at the beginning of the season and then never do it again, and they'll reset traps. And that's not unusual, but ideally traps that have made a catch and you want to move it to a different location, I would ideally like to have that one retreated so it doesn't have other animals curious about what's on that trap and digging at your set. So, but that, that's up to you. But I would highly recommend at least taking the time to do it back up and do it. So
let's see here. Preserving skins with borax for wall hangers.
Okay.
Don't recommend that.
Somebody had actually written that question and said that they had done that and they just had them hanging on the wall. And I would, borax basically is a bleach that is sold at the laundry detergent section of the grocery store. 20 meal tune borax. It is typically used as a preservative and as a bug proofer. It's even used as a flux in blacksmithing. I mean, people use it for making soap. I mean, it's got a lot of uses. We use it a lot with bird taxidermy. It's quite commonly used, and with fish taxidermy. You can rub it on your skins. A lot of times people will use it on fur out skins like foxes, coyotes, and bobcats on the inside, around the front legs, around the ears, that kind of thing, just to help preserve that a little bit and get rid of the chance of possibly that thing wanting to taint or get bugs right there. But as far as long time long-term preservation hanging on the wall, it's not ideal. I mean, but if you don't want to spend the money on tanning or whatever, and that's your thing, go for it, and just know that it's not ideal and it won't last as long as a regularly tanned skin.
Right. That, and it probably depends too on where you're hanging it. You know, if it's out in the garage, it's something you're not too worried about. You know, it's like not a big deal. It's kind of a rough coyote or something, and you just want to keep it for a couple of years as the hair starts falling out of it. No big deal. But if you're going to bring it in the house and put it up on the wall next to your other mounts that you have collected over the years, I'd say that's a no-no. It's going to start getting bugs, and that could end up going into your deer mount that you're so proud of. You know, you just don't want to risk it.
Right. Yeah. Even with the borax, you still stand the chance of getting bugs and whatever.
Right.
Anytime you got a skin that's not, I mean, tan skins will get bugs in them. So one that's like this has a chance of even more. So yeah, like Justin said, it's not a great idea to have in the house. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And it will smell too.
I was going to say, it's not going to help with the smell that much either.
Right.
Maybe a little bit, but
unless you thoroughly washed it and, you know, Dawn dish soap and Downy fabric softener and the whole thing. But even still, it's still going to smell. So,
yep.
But if you got them hanging out in the barn and you're in your shed or whatever, that's fine. You know, whatever. So,
when do we start trapping? I actually asked this question to Charlie today. When are we getting out there for the semi-live series?
So here in Indiana, our fox and coyote season actually opens October 15th, which is too early. Most of the time, the crops aren't even out, and that's the case this year. A lot of crops are still in the field. So last year, I think it was last year, it really held us up with them getting the crops out.
Yeah, definitely a delay there.
Because we had a lot of rain. This year's super dry. So, I mean, they're definitely, the farmers are definitely working on them. And, you know, those guys... it kind of gets under my skin. Guys will say, "Oh, those farmers are really messing me up." It's like, those guys are making their living. They're doing the best they can. And, don't take it so personally. So, so we typically in here in Indiana, like I said, our fox and coyote comes in October 15th. Our raccoon season comes in November 8th, and our regular trapping season comes in November 15th. I don't know why we have 3 different dates, but that's the way it is. So normally we'll try to target around that 8th of November, roughly, so we can keep raccoons. If we start a little bit earlier than that, we'll just try to avoid areas that...
Yeah, heavy woods.
Yeah, along heavy brushy woods or whatever. So...
Yeah, it just makes sense to have, you know, if we catch a coon, we can keep it, you know.
Right. Don't have to turn it loose.
So we'll wait till at least November 8th here, then, you know. Now... Sometimes I like to deer hunt a little bit, so it might delay it a hair.
Right, and we always fight this every year because we're so busy in here. I mean, we're very busy with trapping equipment, selling, you know, online, etc. And then we also do taxidermy, so that's a lot of stuff comes in for mounting purposes. Particularly once we hit Halloween and the rut starts kicking in, and then when gun season kicks in, which it's mid-November. So when that kicks in, then that's another thing. It makes it more and more difficult for us to get out of here and spend much time at it. So
yeah,
we always try to fit some in locally. So
yep, we'll hit local, and then once the holidays are out of the way, things wind down just a hair, then we'll take our trips and have even more fun.
Right.
Do fox and coyotes recognize different trap covers over actual dirt at the set?
So
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think they might know a difference or sense something's not quite right.
Right.
Obviously, we still catch stuff all the time on cover holes or peat moss or things that are different. I'm sure there's been times where a coyote's walked by not quite sure what's going on with the set.
Right.
Did he come back later and get caught? Maybe, probably. I always prefer the actual dirt method if it's available and dry. So for that reason alone, but
I mean, it's a good question. And the alternative though is, what are you going to do? So you're just not going to trap if the conditions are very poor, weather-wise, and you need to go to an alternative cover. Wax dirt is probably the best. but a lot of times you don't get enough made, or you didn't get it made, or if you buy it already done, that certainly is an option. But if you're running a lot of traps and you buy it already made, it's it can get fairly add up fairly quickly. So peat moss and coveralls are both good alternatives. Raccoons do love the feel of all of that stuff, and they will be messing with your traps. It's almost always not a coyote or a fox digging at your set. It's almost always a raccoon.
Yeah.
Well,
you got a digger fox, got a digger coyote. That's what you hear all the time.
Yeah. I noticed Tom Morlock put that on Facebook the other day. He says, we've got a situation here. And this is not. He goes, it is, if you think it's a fox or a coyote digging at the set, wrong answer. Because he went down, he had a set messed with, and then he had another set where the trap was actually turned sideways or whatever, and it was a coon, so it's very common. But one thing that we typically try to do when we're using coveralls, and we use coveralls a lot because they're lightweight, and they don't, even if they're damp, they don't freeze or they'll break apart quite easily. We are a fan of those, and there's a lot of volume in a bag, and a bag will go a long ways. So we do try to sift dirt from the area over the coveralls for two reasons. One, it does help them blend, and it does look more natural. The other thing is it keeps those things from blowing away because they're quite light, and they got a lot of fluff to them, I guess is the best way to
it's spongy.
Yeah, so it can actually just blow off your sets. So that sifted dirt on top of there will help pull them in place. Now we have, as you've probably watched us over the years, we do that. Then we get a rain, and then it freezes up, and you will literally have that frozen dirt cookie on top of those coveralls. And the coveralls will be perfectly fine. They are not frozen, but you'll have to pull that frozen cookie off of there of dirt, pull that off and throw it away, and then either leave it the way it is or reblend some drier dirt on top. So, but yeah, they probably do recognize it. But the alternative is this will keep you going when if you weren't doing this, it would be difficult to be going. So that's kind of the alternative. So they're I don't know, just I think it's a valid question, but best case scenario, what's the alternative to not using it? There really isn't one. Some guys will carry in dry dirt that they don't use wax on, and we used to do that when I was a kid. And that was before all this other stuff was thought of or available. And that works fairly well, but when the sun comes out and things start thawing out, that wax dirt will draw moisture from your trap bed and eventually work its way up. So
dry dirt.
I mean, dry dirt. Yeah. So, anyways, that's
it's going to do the same thing as the dirt that's there. It's just going to take longer to get to that point,
right?
Since it's bone dry,
right. In Indiana, here in the Midwest, it's difficult to go very many days without a rain or snow or some very inconsistent weather. So, we're always all fighting the weather when trapping season comes in for sure. So, I mean, that's just part of it. So it's wintertime trapping. That's when you trap. So
that covers it, right?
Yeah, I think that covers it for this time. So be sure to keep getting those questions in, and we'll try to get to them. We'll try to answer at least one or two on the show. As you've probably noticed, the more extensive questions we'll do in this format. We'll have a couple guest people on for the upcoming podcast, but we'll get back to a Q&A later in the season again.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging in there with us, and we'll catch you on the next one. Make sure you follow us on all social media. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube page, and keep the questions rolling in, like you said.
Right.
There's some links down below that we mentioned earlier. You might want to check those out. Also, the website, and there's a Patreon page, too, if you want to support the podcast. So